Well, court has adjourned for the day in the Senzo Meyiwa murder trial just a short while ago at 3 o'clock. In fact, now Advocate Slindelo Masikane wants investigator Thabo Mosia to provide evidence that police policy and protocol is what prevented him doing a thorough investigation at the murder scene. Mshololo continues to poke holes in Musia's evidence, saying the forensics officer did a shoddy job. So what happened today? Let's cross live now to the High Court in Pretoria. My colleague Slindelo Masikane is inside court just after it adjourned at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Very interesting day today, Slindelo, especially around the whole issue of forensics and with Advocate Mshololo still cross-examining Musia. Just before we ended, what was the highlight for you? Good afternoon. Seems we have lost a connection there. We seem to have lost a connection there with Slindelo. We'll try and get back to her shortly. We just try to get a sense and from her as the Advocate Mshololo continues with the cross-examination of Thabo Mosia, the forensics officer. And today was another day of him on the stand. And let's find out what stood out for Slindelo Masikane. Slindelo, we just had a little bit of a freeze there for a moment. We've got you back now. So today, more cross-examination. Musia under the whip, so to speak, and Advocate Mshololo continuing to poke those holes that are important as he defends accused number 5.
Yeah, the grilling continues, Brad Dan, and from what we've seen in terms of the continuation of cross-examination is once more Advocate Slindelo Masikane really going into the details of how Sergeant Thabo Mosia conducted his forensic investigation. In fact, what she's putting to the court is that he did a very bad job in terms of collecting evidence from the crime scene. She even went into his qualifications, whether he was qualified enough actually at the time of the murder to be the one to be the first to attend to that scene. She's questioned the lack of DNA swabs from the home. She's questioned why gunshot residue was not taken from those in the house to rule them out as suspects. She's also brought into question the photographs which were taken by Mosia as compared to the ones he took from the first time he arrived on the scene as well as the second time he arrived on the scene. She's also questioned how, in terms of blood splatter evidence, how that was conducted, how those photographs were taken. When Mosia first arrived on the scene, he did not take any photographs of blood splatter, which he then took when he arrived the second time on the scene. She says there's a discrepancy as to why he didn't take these pictures the first time around. She mentioned that it seemed as though there were blood splatters found on the wall of the kitchen, some in the lounge, but he did not take any blood splatter evidence from the car in which was used to transport Meyiwa to the hospital. Also questioning why it is that paramedics were not called to the scene, perhaps the delay in the time that it took really to get Meyiwa to the hospital. She says that perhaps if an ambulance was called, perhaps they could have better attended to him instead of people trying to take him to a hospital. Also questioning why Mosia did not perhaps check the tracker records of the car to find out if the delay in getting him to a hospital may have subsequently led to his death as well. But let's just take a listen around some of the issues she's raised around the photographs that was taken as well as blood splatter evidence.
Okay. There were no blood stains on the floor, but there were blood spatters on the wall, which was tiled, the kitchen wall.
bengekho ke lapha kule ndawo ke igazi ke kodwa ke obondeni elinawo tayela ilapho ke bekunegazi khona ke futhi singathatha khona.
Can you show us in the pictures that that's
and among madi ali afumanehile sitting room,
and the other blood was found in the
sitting room.
In the sitting room, that will be the lounge.
Fati tiling.
In the lounge area on the floor.
Yeah, very interesting how Advocate Mshololo kept on going at some of that evidence gathering, kind of gaping holes. I found it interesting when she also asked him later, which was a short while ago, about did you take blood samples from the people who were in their house to check, because people have been drinking, and he says, no, that is not my job. Anyway, she also focused quite a bit on the alleged contamination of the crime scene, that by the time the police got there, a lot had happened.
But then this is where things got really interesting. She started to introduce statements that have been taken from witnesses on that particular evening as to what transpired immediately after Senzo Meyiwa was shot. She's now introduced what we understand to be statements from neighbors that were taken, who describe how they gained access into the home, how they noticed that there was water on the floor, how one of the neighbors actually suggested that they start to tidy up the place by removing beer bottles from the floor, because they didn't want the police to find this evidence when they arrived. And in Sergeant Musia's testimony, he does say that when he arrived, the crime scene had already been cordoned off with tape. And in one of these statements, in fact, the witness says that they entered the home before police could arrive and witnessed them cordoning off the crime scene. So already laying the ground to say that the crime scene was not only contaminated, but it was cleaned. Let's take a listen.
Would want to bring that special key for a child.
And they went in the house. I can't remember who opened the house for them. They came out. I always saw the police run, and I thought the police were always in the vicinity. Later, a contingency of police arrived and cordoned off the scene with tapes.
Are e kamorao ho sebakanyana ya ba ho fihla maponesa are ha tsebe hore ke mang a ileng a bulela maponesa monyako hore ba kene ka hare ya ba ho always
and cordoned off the crime scene
always
with
run. I just can't
around the vicinity.
ya ba ha balehwa mo ya ba kamorao ho nakonyana ho fihla hape maponesa a mang a mangata ona ana ora ana a sentse a le haufi le sebaka sa ketsahalo.
Did you hear that, Mr. Musi?
O utlwile seo?
And you arrived at the crime scene after it had already been cordoned off. Am I correct?
Are ye o botsa hore wena ha o fihla sebakeng sa ketsahalo ne sentse ba kwetse ka tape ya go bontsha hona le se etsahetseng. That's correctly so.
Ngizwileka lokho ukufunda ukuthi ke lo fakazi uyaqhubeka athi kwase kufika ke amaphoyisa angena ngaphakathi akazi ukuthi avulela ubani abe ephinda ephuma ke phumela ngaphandle ke amaphoyisa yena ke ecabanga njalo ukuthi kade ekhona kuyo ndawo amaphoyisa futhi ke kuyiqiniso ukuthi ngafika ke amaphoyisa esevayile ngetape amaphoyisa.
So do you see that, according to this statement, you arrived when the crime scene had already been cleaned?
Bona he hore o tshore ho fihla ha o fihlile ho sontso ho bonahala hore sebaka seo sa ketsahalo se security.
Wa
I understand.
Okay, we've adjourned for today, Slindelo. The proceedings ending off at a very interesting point a short while ago at 3 o'clock around the whole issue of alcohol, bottles and beer, with Advocate Mshololo asking that the statements were being taken from people who were drunk, and the Judge Maumane, also interjecting there a little bit. Is that where we should expect things to begin when the cross-examination carries on tomorrow morning?
Definitely so. We understand that Advocate Mshololo wants to elaborate a little bit further on in terms of the condition of those who were in the home at the time of the incident. Of course, we know from Sergeant Musia that no tests were done in terms of determining the alcohol levels of those who were in the house. So when we resume tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., cross-examination continues.
Certificate for that. And what the Advocate Slindelo Masikane was trying to...
Thank you very much, Slindelo Masikane.